I'm Benson Varghese, and I'm sitting down with Christopher Monroe, who was a client of mine after he was arrested for being involved in a drug conspiracy. Christopher's journey before going to prison and before becoming my client, and his journey through prison and after prison, are compelling. Today, we're going to continue telling Chris's story, picking up with his college career. Chris, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Good. Thank you for being here. I know there are a lot of moving parts to getting you here, and we're very thankful that you take the time each month to come sit down with us and provide so much information that is helpful to people who might be facing federal prison and contemplating, hey, is there really hope for me after this? So thank you for sharing your story.
Happy to be here.
So let's pick up with your college career. Where did you go to college?
I went to college in the University of Idaho.
And as we talked about in the last episode, lots of colleges were interested in recruiting you.
They were. Lots of colleges. I had a lot of opportunities to go to different spots. Unfortunately, at this point in my life in high school, I wasn't exactly the stand-up student that I should have been or that I could have been.
You mean academically?
Academically, yeah. So, I did visit a few schools, but after running into a special character in my life by the name of Stephen Forbes, who's now the head coach at Wake Forest, we hit it off, and I picked the University of Idaho because it seemed like a place where I could go and make an instant impact. So it was a no-brainer for us and my family as we milled through the decision and we're thinking about my best interest. University of Idaho was a bright spot for me, we thought.
You mentioned Coach Forbes.
Yes.
And making that decision to pick this university.
Yes.
What excited you about the path forward? Why did you make that decision? And perhaps what did Coach Forbes say to you that really resonated with you?
Coach Forbes had this uncanny ability to sort of connect, right? He was a great connector. He had the ability to help you see what you were capable of. And at this point in my life, I was just, as good as I was still uncertain. And so when I ran into Coach Forbes, he was just this energetic, filled, fiery guy that, really helped me believe that this next step in my life was critical to ultimately being a successful person. And he was a guy's guy, I guess, like in a place in my life where I didn't have very many like tough-nosed guys kind of sort of attitudes. Man, he was just a magnet. When I met him, I instantly knew that I wanted to play for him. So he was unlike any other coach I had spoken to. Fantastic.
And that really helped you make your decision and say, this is a leader I want in my life. This is the team I want to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. He had like this unique ability to sort of be one of the fellas and then be that father figure and be that voice of reason to challenge you to be better. He was somebody I wanted to be around. He was somebody I gravitated to. And unfortunately, I didn't get to gravitate, or I didn't get to spend much time with him. But, he was the reason why I picked the university. I don't think it was the university itself or how beautiful it was. It was just, he was somebody I thought I could really pick up a lot from.
So you start your college career with a lot of hopes, but college ends up being somewhat disappointing in a number of ways. Talk to me about that.
College life wasn't particularly the greatest thing for me. It was, but for all the wrong reasons. College for me was a very sad time. It was a time where I was extremely homesick. The hustle and bustle of the college life was a bit much for me. It seemed overwhelming at times. I think every individual or every incoming freshman sort of feels that pressure. Unfortunately, I just wasn't able to deal with it in a healthy way. My coping mechanisms were skewed, and so college quickly became a place for me that was not filled with a lot of brightness. It was a time of uncertainty for me. It was a time where when you should be feeling like you fit in, you feel like you're an outcast. For what reasons, I still don't really understand. I never fully embraced the college experience in the way that one would think I should embrace it as a student athlete with, God-given talents, lots of upside, bright future. I just never was able to embrace or grab onto the concept of the college life for an upcoming sports kid. There was like freshman orientation and all the glitz and glamour that you hear about. Moreover, like the things that you see on TV, about how it's supposed to be just this energetic, fun-loving place full of camaraderie, football games, beer, team spirit. That was present for me and real for me for probably the first month.
So you're 18. You've started college. There are certainly a lot of great things that you like about being a student. Did you gravitate towards the athletes, or who did you end up hanging out with most of the time?
I wanted to gravitate towards the athletes at first. I had this, I really yearned and wanted to be a part of a unit. I think, if you were to ask me what one of the things I was excited about, I had really big dreams of belonging to something greater than myself. Something that I found in skateboarding. We talked about skateboarding before, and how I really loved the camaraderie, and I was attracted and enamored with the next man helping the next man. When I got to college, my expectations really fell short. I on my team visit, I thought that we would be a team. Everything was great. And the more time I spent in Idaho, quickly I began to realize that it was not as I had thought it was going to be. It was more like a splintered sort of two guys over here, one guy over here. I don't remember fellas on the team calling to go work out or together or do things together. It was just a really splintered scene for me, and I couldn't get my footing. I just felt isolated. I had come from California. Most of these guys were coming from different parts of the country, Midwest, the South. I felt like a black sheep. So I sought out like people. And what ended up happening was the like people that I sought out were people who were not typically resembling the people that I hung out in San Diego. They looked like it, but there was an alternative lifestyle that I was about to be submerged into that I was unaware of, which was like the rave scene and the counterculture there, which was a really big party scene. And unfortunately, that's the group of people or the crowd that I found my comfort in when I was unable to find my comfort as a unit with the team.
So here you are on the team. Sounds like lots of talented individuals, but not the cohesiveness or the sense of being a team that you were expecting when you came to Idaho.
Yes.
And you found friends in other arenas, as you said, some that resembled, but were very different from the folks that you knew in California.
Yes.
What came first? Was it the further introduction to the music scene there? Because I understand you at some point became a DJ.
Yes.
Or was it an introduction into drugs?
It was a mixture of both. One of the most powerful things that I've ever experienced in my life, and the lens that you determine or the lens that you decide to look through it, I guess you can determine it as a bad experience or a good experience, but nonetheless, it was powerful for me. I had always had a love for music as a young kid. Music was constantly playing in my household when I was young. It would always just be jamming. My sister, my mother, everybody around us. So music was a really big deal for me. And I've always been somewhat of a dreamer. And it only took one time, Benson, for me to be in a club under the influence of drugs and then watching somebody manipulate the music the way that these DJs were manipulating the music. And I don't know how to explain exactly what happened, but there was no turning back for me. It changed my life. It changed how I viewed things. It changed how I felt about things. It changed my perspective in life. These drugs did. They started to do something to me where like all I thought about was music, all I thought about was spinning records. It was a mixture of both of them, and like when it came together, there was no stopping it. It was like a train hit me, and man, this is where I'm headed. This is what I really want to do, and it's unfortunate, right? Because drugs will create a false reality for you. But when I went to a club the first time and I tried ecstasy for the first time, and I watched these DJs play this music, something inside of me happened. It altered me.
So let's talk about that first time. Here you are in Idaho. You show up at a club because you want to listen to the music. You want to hang out with some people that you've met. How do you first get drugs? Does someone offer it to you? What's that first experience in Idaho like?
I think it was the typical seeking out of drugs, right? Like, I didn't go to the club with the intent to seek out drugs, but I did go to the club and run into several people that I had brushed shoulders with and saw that they were having a great time, and wanted to have a good time, right? What's one time going to do? Well, I could surely do it one time and get away with it. And that was the tipping point for me was, hey, can you get me one?
So up to this point in life, had you tried anything else? Had you tried marijuana?
I had tried marijuana with a high school friend, and I had done a minimal amount of drinking. When I say minimal, juxtaposed to, the average high school kid. In high school, I wasn't focused on drugs, so I did try it, but it was not a habitual thing, a weekly thing, a month. Like, it was few and far between, and it wasn't anything that I sought out on a constant basis or talked about. It wasn't anything that, held a spot in my life.
So here you are imagining, what's me trying this one time going to do? Obviously that changes your life entirely. How do you go from someone listening to music who's passionate about music to actually being able to spin records? How did that opportunity come about?
I think I sort of kicked the door down and made it happen, right? I've always sort of had a knack for fitting in or finding a way to rub shoulders with important people, for lack of words. But when I saw what they were doing with the music, and I registered how it made me feel, obviously the next step was, how can I be in this state of mind and manipulate the music myself? Because I'm high in the club and I'm thinking about things, and I'm like thinking, that record should have dropped there. And it didn't. Okay, well, I want to make the record drop there. So, it was a small college town, and there was local DJs, and there was a local DJ that I really gravitated to. And throughout my continuing to go to the club, I eventually broke ice, told him I'd like to do, and then, I remember his response, don't you play for the team? Why are you even here? Yeah. And, just sort of dismissed that and don't worry about it. It's cool. I just want to learn how to spin records. Can you make some time for me to spin some records? And the rest was history. I started not only going to the clubs and getting high, but then I started going to the clubs, getting high, going to the after parties, playing on the turntables, learning, paying my dues, sort of wrecking a couple mixes, getting a couple booze. But, that's how it happened. It was come to the club, get high, come to the club, get high, meet people, find out what you want to do, go do it.
So here you are, you've taken ecstasy, you've kicked down a door, you found a new opportunity. In your mind, there are a lot of things that are going right, things that you like, but there's also a darker story here. So what happens with the drug use? Psychologically,
the drugs gave me a spiritual, I don't know any other way to explain it, but call it a spiritual, like, enlightenment. It opened my mind, and it let me see things in such a different way that I didn't want to see things any other way. I was at peace with things. And once I tried those drugs, I didn't want to live my life any other way. Life was painful. Life was tragic. Life was challenging. It was demanding. And when I was under the influence of these drugs, I didn't feel the pressure of any of that. I didn't have to worry about it. I felt like I had things figured out. I felt like life was I felt like life was bigger than the opportunities that God was giving me. Like that it was like it paled in this opportunity with basketball paled in comparison to the things that I was learning and feeling on these drugs. So it became an everyday. It went from like an every week to an every day to a way of life for me for my time at Idaho. I guess, like it's just a really hard thing to explain to somebody who has never ever experienced the mind altering properties or effects of these drugs. These drugs are so powerful and they do something to you that is so extreme. And it was just like such a good experience. I just wanted to figure out, how can I balance this and this? Because if I have this and I combined it with this, I'm just going to be like this superhuman or this super intelligent, understanding, peaceful warrior. I don't even know how to. I'm struggling right here, but because it's such a feeling that I don't know if words can hold it.
Completely changed your perception on life.
Yes,
and so that desire to somehow balance the drug use. And what drugs were you using at this point while you're still in Idaho?
Okay, so at this time I'm using acid, mushrooms, and ecstasy.
Most people who haven't tried those substances would imagine, how are you even functioning? But getting back to this idea of, in your mind, you want to balance the feelings that you get from DJing, being able to alter your outlook on life through the drugs, seemingly give you some hope. How did that balance with what you were expected to do on the team? Were you able to show up? And if so, for how long?
I was able to show up. I was able to show up and practice. I did it quite often. I did it more often than not. At this time, I'm young. I'm fit. I'm just able to go. I'm a beast. I'm tearing through everything. I'm running through every party. I'm running through every scene, every show, and then I'm just returning. I'm practicing. Nobody's saying anything. I think I got this. I think I got it licked. I think I got it wrapped up. I think everything's under control. It didn't really affect me until the drugs started to lose their effect. And other drugs come into play at this time. Some pain pills and some Adderall come into the game for me.
So, Chris, as you're sitting here sharing this with me, some of our audience is going to think we're glorifying drugs. But the reason I'm walking you through this and asking you to share is there are going to be people who are tempted to go down this path or are at the beginning of this path who think, hey, the rest of the world doesn't understand. So this is raw, this is honest, and I'm really appreciative of you digging deep to share this with us. But walk us through how the drugs at this point were really changing your outlook on life and yourself.
The drugs began to take away like my ambition for life and to be successful. It started to shape in me an attitude of minimalism. Like I didn't care about other people's opinions, because at this point now, like I was just sort of this enlightened character. You couldn't tell me anything. I had things figured out. It gave me a false lens to look through life at, and I really believed in it. I believed that everything that was happening or that everything that I was getting from those drugs was bigger than my bigger picture. And I don't know. Like I don't know. To this, was I not doing it? Was I just doing this because I didn't want to work? Because I just didn't want to fail? Was I lashing? Man.
One of the things you mentioned was, you started with ecstasy. You tried other drugs before you get to things like painkillers. And you mentioned the drugs weren't having the same effect on me. Was that experimentation? Was that X isn't cutting it for me alone? I'm going to try acid. Walk me through the progression and lead me to why you started taking pain pills.
I think there's like in any drug culture or any arena that you're in where you're using drugs, I think there's always this attitude of trying to push it to the limit. And when you continually push, you continually bring yourself to a higher state of being high. And at first, it was ecstasy. Then it was ecstasy and a couple, shrooms. Then it was ecstasy and shrooms. Then it was drinking before. Then you keep adding to your bag of tricks, and until it's full, and there's really nothing left you can do with it. And if you're at this point, like I was in my life, if you're an adrenaline seeker, or if you're somebody who's just living for excitement or living for that next big moment, you run out of things to mix. You run out of things to try. You run out of risks to take. And when that started happening, I think a crack began to emerge in the construct and the way I was thinking about how life really was, right? At this point, everybody was telling me how life really was, but they didn't know what was going on. I knew what life was because I was just sunk into this drug stupor, whatever you want to call it. So the drugs started to wear off. By happenstance, I got injured one day, and I sprained my ankle. Typical basketball injury. I went to the college doctor. They prescribed me some hydrocodone. At this point, I had never taken a pain pill, but they did prescribe me some hydrocodone, and I'll never forget the moment where I found out that the drug that I was taking was going to get me high. I didn't know that when I was taking it, the first couple times that I had taken it, it was going to get me high. But then I had a buddy who said, "Hey, whoa, you have these pills." And I said, "Yeah, my ankle's messed up." And he said, "Oh, don't you know you can get high off those things?" I said, "What?" And next thing you know,
tried it.
I tried it with the mind state of, hey, this is going to get me high. And man, it was off to the races. It was another thing to add to the bag of tricks. But unfortunately, what I didn't know was that the, prolonged use or the come down of these drugs was going to drastically affect my life. But that's where I was introduced into pain pills. But that's not necessarily where I took off with my opiate addiction. But that's where I was first introduced and got an idea of what these things were capable of.
Would you say your opiate addiction became full-blown while you were still in college?
My opiate addiction began in college, but so my opiate addiction was sporadic. And look, if you could imagine like a heart monitor, it sort of looked like that. It had peaks and valleys where I would be substituting other drugs for other drugs. There was a time in college where I can remember where I was bad on pain pills to the point where I knew that they were pervasive on the campus. And since I lived in a college dorm, it wasn't uncommon for me to randomly be knocking on doors of people that I knew, people that I knew who were associated with people that I knew. I'd be sick, asking for pills, explaining stories, coming up with, excuses as to why I needed them. But yeah, it had a small spike there for me. But I managed to sort of finagle myself and my way out of it. But I did have a rough spell while I was there with the pills. And they revisited me back there. They revisit me, further down my drug usage. But
when do you start to see the negative effects on your college career? And what were they?
There was I talk about in my drug addiction. I talk a lot about these lucid moments that come few and far in between, and they're fleeting for the most part. But they started to happen more and more. I remember going home for the summer, and I went home for the summer with back to San Diego, and I ended up staying with some friends, and some friends of mine were asking me what I was doing and what was going on, and I remember their disappointment in me, and my friends, at this point in my life were all that I had, all that I really had, all that my friends back home were priceless. They were my everything. And I remember being crushed by some of their comments to me, like, what are you doing? Why aren't you taking this seriously? And I'd be lying if I told you that I didn't understand why they didn't understand what I was doing, because at this point, obviously, these drugs were taking over me. And I'm in college and I'm having the college experience.
Right. So why were they disappointed? Was it academics? Were you not doing well on the team? Or had you shared with them what you were doing outside of campus?
Yeah, honestly, I came home and shared with them what I was doing because I thought it would be cool. I thought that they would, because, all my friends were skaters, surfers, and they spent their time doing a considerable amount of partying, but they always, they were taking care of their business. And so when I was honest with them and told them what I was doing, they understood what I was sacrificing. And out of a sign of, I guess, real appreciation and love, a couple of my closest friends, my dearest friends, told me that they were disappointed in me and really didn't want to have anything to do with me at that point in time because of the sacrifices I was making and how selfish it was, not only to my family, but mostly to myself. How could you have so much talent and want to hang out with? I remember it was my friend Adam, who was a one-time professional skater, and he told me straight up, and this was somebody that I had looked up to my entire adolescence. He was just like, he was the best skater. He was like that guy. And he looked at me and he said, "Man, you make me sick."
Wow.
He told me, "Man, you have so much talent and you want to hang out here with us. You want to hang out and do drugs and waste away when you've got all this ability to be successful." And that's something that's never left me. But I think that was the first moment in time where I realized that what I was doing wasn't cool. It wasn't it wasn't the end all be all, that this couldn't be sustained. This was a problem.
It's resonated with you through all these years. Did it have a short-term impact on you? Did that change anything about your immediate behavior?
It didn't change anything about my immediate behavior, but what it did was it never left me. It sort of continued to knock on the door. It never stopped knocking.
A word of encouragement to anyone that speaks harsh, sometimes hard truths to true friends, right? That you never know what the impact is going to be, however long down the road.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another memorable moment for me where I knew that I had fallen by the wayside and that I was in the wrong lane. At this time, I'm a full-blown raver. I wear beads. I wear really skin-tight shirts. I wear big, baggy, bell-bottom pants that are altered, that have like leopard print in them. I walk around with big headphones on. I am a sight to see at this moment. And I had gotten so comfortable and felt like I could do whatever I wanted to, that one day I decided that we had a team meeting, and one day I decided I was going to show up to the team meeting in full rave gear. I had been to a party the day before. I hadn't showered. I hadn't slept. And so I walking down campus, in the middle of campus, just like this, a star athlete walking down the middle of campus with this attire on. And to this point, I think my coaches had heard about what I was doing. They sort of made a couple comments here and there, but they hadn't really addressed the issue. I had an assistant coach by the name of Chris Jans, and he was a fiery son of a gun. And I was walking across the practice football field to get to the Kibbe Dome, and I'll never forget, I could almost hear him stop. Like, he was walking, but I almost heard him stop in his tracks. And I looked, and he looked at me, and all I heard was cuss words. I heard I just could hear him snorting, spitting, and he's come marching across that field, and he gave me a dress down that I'll never forget. He said some things that probably aren't appropriate right now, obviously. But in that moment, right, I had this weird experience because there were people around. There were football players around. There were track and field players around. There were trainers, everyday people. And it seemed like in that moment, time froze. And I was able to just sort of pan around and look at everybody's reaction. At that moment, I realized I was in too deep. At that very moment, I realized how far away I had gotten from reality. I was living in an alternate reality where records and music were the only way of life. And I instantly snapped out of it at that moment. And he sent me away. He sent me away and told me to go to my dorm and that they didn't need me at that team meeting. And that was a hard stop for me. That was a moment in my life where, you know, the guilt and the shame really hit me about how much I had wasted. I had wasted quite a bit of time and money and people's compassion and love. And I was able to feel and embrace fully in that moment, all of it, and it crushed me.
Up to that point, you'd largely been living two separate lives. And to a large extent, there had been very little overlap. You were somehow able to manage getting high, sleepless nights, and still showing up for practice. But finally, it all kind of came together. And you've talked about this before. What people think of you matters to you.
Absolutely.
So when you're frozen in that moment, getting dressed down, and you're panning, and you see all these people, perhaps that's one of the reasons why that moment resonated so much for you. It was very public. Everyone in that moment knew something's not right here. And someone that you respected, looked up to, should be listening to, was in a position to have to dress you down and send you away from the team.
Yes.
Were you there on a scholarship?
I was.
In large part due to your athletic abilities being on the basketball team?
Yes.
Are there other examples of how the drug use crept into your performance on the team?
Yes. At the very beginning of the rave, at the rave scene and the participation in my drug use and all of that, it was sort of compartmentalized. And I think everybody goes through that. Like when you pick, especially if you're using drugs, there's this moment where it's like, okay, I got a hold on this. I got a grip on this. I'm not going to do this because I got a game in 3 days, or I'm not going to do this because I got a team meeting, or I'm not going to do this because I got a visit from so-and-so. And in the beginning, that was where I was at. I still had my bearings about what I was going to be doing. But towards the end, so you could get a better picture of how these drugs were overtaking me, I can recall a time when we had I think it was a 3-day weekend, but on the return of the 3-day weekend, we had a home game. On the first day off from that weekend, I got into the car with a couple of buddies and drove all the way to Seattle, Washington. Spent 2 days in Seattle, Washington, using ecstasy, acid, and spent, didn't no sleep, up at a massive rave, tons of people, tons of things going on. I spent my whole weekend there using drugs, staying up. On the way back, I can remember I had acid. I took about 7 hits. I think I took about 7 hits of acid, and we pulled over into a little camping ground. I wandered around for hours and hours and hours in this camping ground on acid. I was dirty, hungry. I remember this, but the next day I had a home game. Yeah. And so we got back to the school. And I think I had about maybe 15, 16 hours left before it was time to play. And, if you're not familiar with the effects of acid or the time it takes to sort of like come down to a normal baseline, it could be hours and hours and hours. It could be days. And I took a considerable amount of acid, not only that, but ecstasy as well. And, I took the court full blown high on acid, and nobody ever really said anything to me about it. I have a suspicion that I may not have played exactly or been in spots exactly where I should have been. But that's exactly how invasive it had become now. There was no longer any rational decision making. It was the party's just as important as the game.
So when you started playing basketball at Idaho, there were no drug tests for the team.
Yes.
And one day you walk into a team meeting and they suddenly announce you're going to have drug tests. Tell us what happens from there.
I remember when they told me I was getting drug tested, or the team was getting drug tested. And honestly, like I told you, it was so splintered and things were moved around and people were just sort of doing their own thing. Man, there were people smoking weed on this team. There were people drinking. So I remember when they said, yeah, we're going to drug test you. And at this point I had been doing cocaine. I had been doing ecstasy. I had been doing shrooms, acid, and I'm full of it. In this meeting, like if you were to test me, man, I'm dead in the water. But I remember feeling so above everything. I was above anybody's foreknowledge of what I could be. I was above any rules. I was above everything. I remember sitting in that training room and just laughing. Oh, okay, you're going to drug test us? All right. Left that meeting and went and got high. About 2-3 weeks later, I get a call on my cell phone. And it's the trainer, I think his name was Barry. And he said, hey, we're going to need you for a drug test. I said, what? He said, yeah, we're going to need you for a drug test down here in 2 hours. You can make it? You're here on campus? And I said, yeah. He said, all right. So, boom, the race is on. I've got 2 hours. I've got 2 hours to figure something out. I've got cocaine, I've got acid, I've got ecstasy, weed, pain pills, everything in my system. So I immediately start panicking. I go to, some of the guys' rooms that I hang out with because they're on drugs. They've obviously got to know how to pass a drug test. I failed to realize that these guys didn't have any ambition, weren't really going anywhere, so they didn't really have to worry about a drug test. So they didn't have any answers for me. So I went to a football player and I said, hey, man, they're going to drug test me and I need to pass this drug test. And he's, no problem, I got you. So he gives me this drug test. It was just one of these syrupy bottles. Drink this. Don't piss for an hour. Drink this. Don't go to the bathroom for an hour. Drink a couple gallons of water and you'll be okay. So I'm like, okay. And I'm panicking at this point because now here's another lucid moment where you realize, okay, life is life. They're not playing with you. So I take the drug test and I'm not going to the bathroom like I'm supposed to. So I take a gallon of water and I drink it. Nothing happens. And, I take another gallon of water and nothing happens. And at this time I'm bloated and I'm just really uncomfortable. And I've never drank this much water in my life. And the time is ticking. The clock is winding down. And finally I get that call. He's like, you need to come down here. And I'm confident. I'm confident that I'm going to pass the test, right? Because the football player gave it to me. There's no way. And even if I don't pass the test, they're going to whatever. So I'm drinking this water and I just start getting sick. And I'm getting sick. And this is during a weekday. So the campus is full of people. And I got to walk to the Kibbe Dome. I got to walk there to take this drug test. And so about 2 minutes after I hit the front door on the way to the Kibbe Dome to take this drug test, I start projectile vomiting. I can't stop vomiting. And I'm walking up the main split through the campus by the library, and everybody knows who I am, and I'm just walking, and I look haggard. Like, looking back now, I know that I looked haggard. I had a jug of water in my hand. I was keeled over. I was throwing up. My hair was disheveled. I had been partying all week, and I'm walking through the campus, and I'm just throwing up. I can't stop throwing up, and people are looking at me crazy, and I'm trying to like laugh and play it off, and I'm telling them, "No, it's cool, it's cool." I get to the Kippy Dome, and I'm vomit all over me, water all over me. I can smell it all over my face, and I walk in, and then Barry looks at me, and he just shakes his head. He's just like, can't quite understand it. And I'm like, I'm ready to take my test, And I took that test, and I failed it. And that was the beginning of the unraveling. That was the last straw where I knew I felt like I had worn out my welcome.
Yeah. So you fail the drug test. You've had another very public display of having fallen short. Everyone that saw you walk up to take that drug test. And it becomes even more public. What happens next?
They on the student paper, they published my suspension, which was my disciplinary action for the failed UA. They published my picture and my suspension in the paper, and then they sat me for I believe it was 2 games. They sat me for 2 or 3 games. And this was, obviously another indication that I was wanted but not needed. And I had always felt like at this point in my life, if I'm to be honest with you, that I was needed there.
Right. So at this point, has the bubble burst, or is air just slowly starting to leak out of that lens that you were looking through?
The skewed lens of the drug use, what the drugs had allowed me to sort of construct this sort of alternate reality. Yes. At this point, reality is now creeping into my life. I'm starting to notice people around me that are happy because they're achieving things that they set their minds out to. I'm starting to realize that I don't have any goals. I'm starting to realize that there's very little tolerance for me. When there was at one time a lot of tolerance and a lot of expectation and hope, that's a tough thing to deal with too. I realized that people's expectations of me were now becoming diminished. They weren't really concerned with the things that I would complain about or need, obviously because they knew that I wasn't investing my time soundly. But yes, this was a tough time for me. This was an unraveling moment. This is when reality started to show me who was king.
We talked a lot about your time on the court, but you were also starting to see the impact of at least the sleepless nights, but certainly the drug use academically. And yet initially there too, you turned to drugs. So talk to us about Adderall and why you were taking it.
So my whole life I've been diagnosed ADHD. I have had problems with my attention span, quite the wild child, into everything, just, aggro, just everywhere all the time. I had spurts where I would need my medication and spurts where I would not need my medication. Adderall was just another thing to mix with. At first I needed the Adderall for good intentions. At first, College was hard for me to focus on. Like I said, I was a big, strong kid, but I was immature. I was unable. I had some shortcomings. I had some things that I really needed to work on, and one of them was adjusting to and learning my role in the fast-paced life of college. So I did at one point say I didn't need it. But there was a healthy moment in my life where I was like, maybe I need this medication to sort of help me collect my bearings, focus on the things that I need to focus on, because there are some things that they're expecting me to do. That quickly was erased. Obviously, when I found out that you could get high on Adderall, it's the craziest thing. I took it for years and years and years and never knew. Never felt, never understood. But once some of the feelings that the other drugs I had taken were triggered in me, this medication that had been helping me had sort of like the veil had been torn away from it. And I realized that it was a substance that now had a likely or a relationship to the feelings that I was feeling in the club. And so I started to abuse it. I started to use it for nefarious reasons. I started to use it to stay awake. I started to use it because it made me feel good. It felt good to take with it. Acid and ecstasy. I certainly stopped taking it because of the classroom, and it became a crutch. It became an excuse for me to get high, a legal way for me to get high. It became another problem for me.
At the end of the day, it's another amphetamine.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's another drug. And, I quickly learned how to, extract its proper use and, take it for what it shouldn't be taken for.
So recreational drugs, prescription drugs that ultimately are taken recreationally. Long term, how does this impact your college career? Where does your college career go? Do you finish 4 years at Idaho?
I don't finish 4 years at Idaho. Long term, what happens is, and what happens in most cases, I believe, is that they ran out. Everything began to run out. People that I partied with were moving away. Places that I now got pills were dry. The guy I used to buy cocaine with now is in jail. The party scene is now moving into closer to or across the border into Washington. So things are now starting to get further away from my reach. The further they get away from my reach, the more time I have to spend with myself and not be so distracted by all of these things that were once at my disposal. Obviously, along with that comes the come down.
Right.
And talk about reality, starting to show its face. When the drugs and the ability to get them when it started to get harder and harder for me, I didn't have a choice but to sit with myself and begin to see the trail of disaster. Like I began to see what I had become. And the clearer that picture got for me, the more certain I was that there was no going back. I did not believe that I could remake myself at the university. I had been seen by too many in the worst spots. I had been seen by too many buying, selling. I just, people had a clear picture of me, and I did not think that I could overcome it. I did not think I could overcome the damage that I had done, the reputation that I had made for myself. And I didn't think I could do it without drugs. And at this point, they were almost non-existent now. So I was coming down and faced with reality.
So how many years were you there?
I started the beginning of my sophomore year there.
How were you funding the drug use up to that point?
My parents.
Did they know what the money was being used for? Any suspicions?
Yeah, I talked to you about my mother and her battle with her demons. And I just can't honestly tell you that she couldn't have had an inclination of what was going on. I think there's a real common phrase addicts use, and it's if you got it, you could spot it. And so I do believe any individual. I don't think you had to be on drugs to recognize what I was going through or what I was putting myself through. So I believe that my family knew. I just believe that my family didn't know how to react. It was a fragile situation. They wanted me to be successful. I believe that they just thought I was going to pull out of it. I believe that they thought it was a phase. I believe that, it's sad to say, but I think that they were blinded by their love and their hope that I would be able to see the great gift that had been bestowed upon me, which was a shot at a college degree, a better life, and a chance to represent my family the correct way.
So what happens in sophomore year that brings all of that to an end?
It's at this sophomore year that my drug use has began to decline, not because my appetite for the drugs is diminishing, but because the drugs are becoming harder to get. I'm no longer able to go to practice in the same state of mind that I want to, which is, under a hydrocodone and an Adderall where everything is okay. When I have those drugs, it got to a point like where I'd be traveling and we'd be playing on the road. I would have to have that combination of pills. I would have to have that combination to make sure that my mind and that I was prepared to play. If I didn't have it, even if I didn't feel bad physically, mentally, I couldn't function without it. So that went on my whole freshman year, and then the transition into the sophomore year, those drugs started to become less and less available to me, and I started to come down from like a year bender, and it was too much. I decided that Idaho was not the place for me. For multiple reasons. One, because I felt like I had done so much damage that it couldn't be repaired. Two, I couldn't find the drugs. Three, at this point, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. I just felt like it would be better for me to tuck my tail and run than to try to deal with the mess that I had made. So I made a decision after a few conversations with my stepfather and some manipulation that, I just wasn't feeling like, at this point, my stepfather didn't know that he, if anybody didn't know, I believe it was him. He didn't know that I was, severely addicted to drugs, but he had always been my ace. He ushered me through this process. And just so I'm clear, it wasn't that like I just hated basketball. There was a process to it, and there was a camaraderie between the people in basketball. It just wasn't, it never like turned into anything that I thought it would be. But at this point, I called for advice, or better yet, to tell him that I thought that the University of Idaho was treating me unfairly. They weren't utilizing me properly, and that it would be better for me to leave, regroup, go to a junior college, and then transfer to a bigger school. And this was all manipulation on my part. I knew that he would accept anything that had to do with me being a real man and setting, some solid goals and having a vision for myself. And so I did that, and we went back and forth, and he said, okay, if that's what you want to do, we'll do it. And I decided to quit.
To go to junior college?
To get out of Idaho. It had become a dark place for me. There were times where I'd be locked in my dorm room for weeks on end, wouldn't come out. Nobody could get me out. Just doing tons of cocaine by myself in the room, paranoid. I was antisocial at this point. I didn't want to be around anybody. I didn't have very much communication with my teammates at all. It was constant bickering. I had no communication with just, I didn't have any friends. It was just a dark, lonely spot for me. And I couldn't see myself moving forward. So I decided that it was time for me to leave. And I decided to quit.
Where'd you go?
I went back to San Diego, but I'll never forget the day I quit. Sort of like something else that's never stuck with me about how important it is for you to honor people who want to help you, and to honor them with healthy choices, and to not be scared of being vulnerable or asking for help. I didn't particularly get along with my coach. He was a hard motherfucker. He was a hard dude. His name was Coach Farrar, and he didn't care too much about why you couldn't do something. He just wanted to know how you were going to fix it. The day I decided to quit, I remember I was pacing out in front of the Kibbe Dome, the same place where I showed up in those clothes. And I hung the phone up, and it's like, man, I'm going to quit. I'm going to throw all this away right now because I know he's not going to let me quit. I know that Coach Farrar won't let me quit. So I walked up there, and he just, he did the same thing day in and day out. Coffee, newspaper, a little attitude, same stuff, day in, day out. I went up there, rarely had gone to his office, knocked on his door, and he just peeked over his newspaper, and he looked at me, and I said, "Hey, can I come in?" And he said, "Yeah, Monroe, come on, come sit in." He had this real raspy voice. So I sat down, and he said, what do you need? And I said, "I want to talk to you about something." And, I started beating around the bush, and then I went into this, I don't know if I was trying to chum the water for him to feel sort of sympathetic to the way I was feeling about how I had ruined my own life, or maybe, I don't know, but, he just didn't buy into it. He just didn't buy into it at all. And, I said, I think you guys are utilizing me the wrong way. I think that, I have better opportunities. I think I think you're overlooking me. And he didn't offer any rebuttal. He just agreed with me. Okay. And I told him that I was going to take myself and go somewhere else. And said, "Man, I don't think this is the place for me." And he looked at me, and he said, "You know what? I think you're right." And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that he felt the same way that I did. That if I was honest with myself, I had single-handedly destroyed an opportunity to make myself better. And he just said, "I think you're right." He said, "Is that all? Is that it?" And a couple moments awkward silence, and I said, "That's it, Coach." And he said, "Have a good day, Monroe." That's the day I quit.
You go from this mental state where you believe the world needs you, this team needs you, to this conversation with a coach who is not only telling you, "I don't need you," he hasn't even verbalized a single reason why he wants you. Right? You've done a 180 from your view on what the world was for you to that moment when you quit. We're going to talk more about your life in future episodes, but as we always do, we want to end on a high note, and it's a weird place to pull a high note from. We're going to ask you, what's one thing you learned in prison that has positively impacted you and still helps you through?
One thing that prison taught me was that no matter what you're dealing with, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you're losing or what you're gaining, you always have an opportunity to get better, no matter where you're at.
Chris, thank you so much once again for sharing your story, and in doing so, hopefully helping people that either feel like, hey, going to prison is this hopeless situation I'm walking into, or maybe they're much earlier and they're experimenting with drugs, and maybe they hear this and they make some different decisions. So thank you again for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to telling the rest of your story.
Thank you, Benson.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Second Shot. We're looking forward to sharing Chris's story in future episodes, so be sure to tune in and subscribe to us anywhere podcasts can be found.